Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into some really fascinating research that's giving us a new window into the very first totally silent stages of Alzheimer's disease, and it hinges on a wild idea. What if one of the first signs of trouble isn't the brain slowing down, but actually kicking into overdrive?
Yeah, that's the central question here, and it's pretty counterintuitive, right? A major new study is suggesting that long before any memory problems show up, the brain might be working overtime, trying to compensate for the very earliest signs of damage.
So, to really get why this is such a potential game changer, we first have to understand how Alzheimer's gets started. Because its journey begins, well, it begins in silence. And that is the absolute key. The disease can be simmering away for 10, 15, sometimes even 20 years before you'd ever notice something is wrong. This huge, quiet window is exactly where scientists are hunting for the earliest possible clues that the disease process has begun.
Now, the main culprit they're tracking is a protein called amyloid beta. In a healthy brain, it's cleared away. But in Alzheimer's, these little proteins start sticking together, forming these gunky, toxic plaques. So measuring amyloid levels is one of our best tools for spotting the disease's footprint, even in people who feel perfectly fine.
So how in the world do you study a silent disease? Well, you have to look inside the brains of a lot of healthy people. And that's precisely what the researchers behind this study did, on a pretty impressive scale.
They got together nearly 1,000 older adults who were all cognitively normal. And importantly, these folks were from the general community, not memory clinics. That's a huge number for a study like this, and it means the results are much more likely to be true for the rest of us.
Okay, so to see who might have those very early, hidden signs of Alzheimer's, they analyzed everyone's cerebral spinal fluid. This lets them get a direct measurement of those amyloid proteins, giving them a kind of snapshot of the chemical environment inside the brain. And this is where it gets really interesting. They split the group based on what they found. You can see about 131 people landed in this biomarker-positive group. On average, they were a little older and way more likely to carry the APOE4 gene, which is a major genetic risk factor. But look at that last line. Lower amyloid in the spinal fluid is actually a bad sign. It means more of that sticky stuff is getting trapped inside the brain, building those plaques. So, with their groups sorted, the researchers used brain scans, functional MRIs, to look at something called functional connectivity. It sounds complex, but the analogy is simple and perfect. Think of it like a city's communication grid. It's not about the physical roads, it's about how well information is flowing between all the different neighborhoods. Is it smooth, or are you getting traffic jams?
And right here in that communication grid is where they found something totally unexpected. The relationship between those amyloid plaques and how the brain was talking to itself, it wasn't a straight line. It was this really surprising curved pattern.
Let's just walk through what they saw. In those very first stages, when just a few of those amyloid plaques are starting to build up in the brain,
The brain's communication actually got stronger. It's a phenomenon called hyperconnectivity. So certain parts of the brain started talking to each other more intensely, not less. The brain was literally working harder to get the job done.
And the leading theory for why this happens? It's the brain compensating. It's as if the brain senses this tiny bit of inefficiency caused by the early damage and just turns up the volume on its networks to maintain normal thinking. It's actively fighting back. But of course, you can't run in overdrive forever. What the study also showed is that as the amyloid plaque buildup gets worse and worse, that hyperconnectivity eventually fails. The system just gets overwhelmed, and the communication starts to break down and decline.
And this chart shows that inverted U shape perfectly. See, with low amyloid, you've got normal activity. As the amyloid levels get into that moderate range, boom, the network activity peaks. That's the brain working harder. But then, at high amyloid levels, the system starts to fail, and activity drops way down, even below where it started.
I'd love this analogy. It's like you're in a car, and you have to push the engine harder and harder just to stay at the same speed. That high revving sound, it's a warning sign that things are under strain and trouble might be just down the road. Okay, so we've seen these biological changes happening in the brain scans. But what does all this actually mean for a person's ability to think, to remember, to function in their daily life? I mean, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's one thing to see the brain revving its engine, but is that extra effort actually paying off? Does it translate to better performance? Well, the answer seems to be a resounding yes.
The researchers found that right in that sweet spot of hyperconnectivity, when the brain was working its hardest,
people actually performed better on a whole bunch of cognitive tests. Their visual memory was better, their spatial skills were sharper, they could process information faster, and they had better executive function. The compensation was absolutely working.
So let's zoom out. What's the big picture here? Why is discovering this inverted U shape of brain activity such a huge deal in the fight against Alzheimer's?
For me, the most powerful takeaway is that the brain is not a passive victim here. It's resilient. It puts up a fight. This whole period of hyperconnectivity is a visible sign of the brain actively defending itself, trying to hold the line against the disease. And that has some massive implications. First, it gives us a potential new biomarker, a signal we can look for years before memory loss even begins. Second, it tells us exactly which brain networks are on the front lines, the ones that are most vulnerable early on. And maybe most exciting of all, it suggests a whole new strategy for treatments. What if we could develop drugs that help the brain do what it's already trying to do, to support its own natural defenses and keep it in that high-functioning state for longer?
And that really leaves us with this final and I think very hopeful question. This research gives us a glimpse of the brain's own defense system in action. The next great challenge is to figure out how we can step in at that critical moment, how we can support that revving engine, reinforce it, and maybe, just maybe, prevent it from ever breaking down.
Thanks so much for digging into this with me. We'll catch you on the next one.